I spent a night in my car after it broke down in Zion Park. Something scratched a message on my windshield from the outside. Welcome to the Wilderness Protocol. There are protocols for when your vehicle breaks down in the wild. You stay with the car. You conserve your water. You make yourself visible. You wait for rescue. These are logical, human-centric rules, built on the assumption that you are the only intelligent life form for miles and that your biggest threats are dehydration and exposure. But there is no protocol for when the wilderness decides to communicate with you. There is no manual for what to do when something outside your locked car door starts to scratch a message onto the glass, a message that proves you are not alone and that you are profoundly, terrifyingly understood. My name is Mark. I'm a structural engineer. I believe in physics, in stress points, and in the predictable ways materials fail. But I spent one night in Zion National Park that taught me that there are other kinds of stress, other kinds of failure. And that the worst sound in the world is not an engine dying. It's the sound of a sharp point, deliberately, intelligently, writing on glass in the dead of night. I was in Zion for the geology. I've always been fascinated by deep time, by the stories that rocks can tell. The sheer towering sandstone cliffs of Zion are a library of geologic history, a testament to millions of years of patient, relentless work by water and wind. I was there to hike, to photograph, and to feel small in a good way. To be reminded of my own insignificant speck of existence in the grand silent sweep of time. I had spent the day hiking the Narrows, a breathtakingly beautiful and strenuous trek up the Virgin River, through a slot canyon with walls 1,000 feet high. By the time I hiked back out, I was exhausted, my legs were aching, and the sun was beginning to set, painting the massive sandstone cliffs in fiery shades of orange, red, and purple. It was a perfect day. I got back to my car, a reliable if unremarkable sedan, at the Temple of Sinawava parking lot. I threw my pack in the back seat, cranked up the air conditioning, and started the long, scenic drive out of the park. The Zion Mount Carmel Highway is a marvel of engineering, a road that winds and tunnels its way through the very heart of the mountains. I was about halfway along the scenic drive, deep in a section of road flanked by towering monolithic cliffs on both sides, when the car sputtered. The check engine light, a symbol I hadn't seen in years, flickered on, a tiny, ominous orange sun on my dashboard. The car sputtered again, a sick coughing sound. The engine lost power. The steering grew heavy. I managed to coast to the side of the road, into a small gravel pullout, before the car finally, completely died. I sat there for a moment in the sudden ringing silence. The only sound was the faint ticking of the cooling engine. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The battery was fine, the radio and lights still worked, but the engine was completely unresponsive. Frustration, not fear, was my first emotion. I was miles from the park entrance. It was getting dark. And of course there was no cell service. I was a structural engineer. I understood mechanical failure. This was an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. I popped the hood. I am not a mechanic, but I know the basics. I checked the battery connections. They were solid. I checked the oil. It was fine. There was no visible sign of what had gone wrong. The engine, which had been so reliable for so long, had simply given up. As true darkness fell, the desert came alive with a different kind of beauty. The sky, free from the light pollution of any city, was a deep, velvet black, so densely packed with stars it looked like a spill of diamond dust. The massive cliffs around me were no longer red and orange, but colossal, black silhouettes against the star-dusted sky. The temperature began to drop rapidly as it does in the desert. The smart, safe thing to do was to follow the protocol. Stay with the vehicle. Another car would eventually come along. A park ranger would make their rounds. So I settled in for the night. I ate the last of my trail mix, drank some water, and reclined my seat. I turned on the radio, trying to find a signal, but there was only the soft, gentle hiss of static. It was almost peaceful. I closed my eyes, thinking I would just rest until I saw headlights. I don't know when I drifted off to sleep, but I know what woke me up. It was a sound. A soft, rhythmic sound. Scrape! 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 It was coming from outside the car. I sat bolt upright, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. My first thought was an animal. A deer maybe, or a bighorn sheep, rubbing its antlers against the metal of the car. Scrape! 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 It was a high-pitched, thin sound. The sound of something sharp being dragged across glass. It was coming from the front of the car. From the windshield. I leaned forward, my breath held, and peered through the dark glass. The moonlight was bright enough to illuminate the hood of the car and the road beyond. There was nothing there. No animal. No person. But the sound continued, slow, deliberate, and unnervingly close. Scrape! It was a long, slow drag this time. My mind raced. A branch blown by the wind, scraping against the glass? But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still. A rock falling from the cliffs above? No, the sound was too precise, too rhythmic. My engineer's brain, the part of me that deconstructs problems into their component parts, analyzed the sound. It was a sharp point applying steady, deliberate pressure. It was not a random act of nature. It was an act of intent. I was not alone out here. Fear, cold and pure, washed over me. I fumbled for the door locks and pressed the button, the loud thunk of the locks engaging seeming to echo in the silent canyon. I reached for my phone, a useless brick with no signal, and turned on its flashlight, aiming the beam through the windshield. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty gravel pullout, the asphalt road, and the sheer sandstone cliff on the other side. There was nothing. No one. But the sound stopped. The moment the light hit the windshield, the scraping ceased. I sat there, my flashlight beam cutting a trembling path across the empty landscape, my ears straining against the sudden, profound silence. Had I imagined it? Was it the sound of the engine cooling, a strange acoustic trick? I held my breath, listening. For 5 long, agonizing minutes there was nothing. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart. I slowly lowered the flashlight, my panic beginning to subside, replaced by a feeling of foolishness. It was nothing. Just the strange sounds of the desert at night. I was about to recline my seat again when my flashlight beam, as I lowered it, caught something on the windshield. It was a mark. A thin white scratch on the outside of the glass. It was a perfectly straight, vertical line, about 6 inches long, starting from the top of the windshield and going down. It was exactly where the sound had been coming from. It wasn't a crack. It was a scratch. An etching. Something had deliberately, and with considerable pressure, carved a line into the tempered glass of my windshield. I stared at it, my blood running cold. The rational explanations evaporated like water on hot sand. This was not an animal. This was not the wind. I sat there frozen for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. I just stared at that single, white, vertical line on my windshield, a piece of impossible, terrifying graffiti left by an unseen artist. Every rustle of the wind, every distant cry of a coyote sent a jolt of terror through me. Dawn, when it finally came, felt like a resurrection. The rising sun set the canyon walls ablaze with color, and the harsh, unforgiving light of day chased away the terrors of the night. The scratch was still there, a pale milky white line against the blue of the morning sky, but in the daylight it seemed less menacing. At around 7 a.m., I heard the welcome sound of an approaching engine. A park ranger's truck pulled up behind me. A friendly, sun-weathered ranger named Mike listened to my story about the engine failure. I didn't mention the sound or the scratch. How could I? He would think I was crazy. He called a tow truck, and by noon, my car and I were back in the small, dusty town of Springdale. The mechanic gave me the news that afternoon. Well, I've got good news and I've got weird news, he said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. The good news is there's nothing wrong with your car. What do you mean, nothing's wrong? I asked. It wouldn't start. I know, he said, scratching his head. The engine's fine. The battery's fine. The fuel line is fine. But the onboard computer, it was completely fried. Not like a power surge. It was wiped. Like someone had hit it with the powerful, localized EMP. Never seen anything like it. I replaced the chip and she started right up. You're good to go. An EMP. In the middle of Zion National Park. It made no sense. I paid the mechanic and I was about to leave when I remembered the scratch. Hey, one more thing, I said. There's a weird scratch on the windshield. Can you take a look? See if it can be buffed out. He walked to the front of the car and squinted at the glass. He ran his finger over it. Then he frowned. That's strange, he said. What? Well, he said, leaning in closer. It's not a scratch. What do you mean? I can see it right there. I know, he said, looking at me with a puzzled expression. But it's not on the outside of the glass. It's on the inside. The mechanic's words hung in the air of that hot, dusty garage. It's on the inside. I walked over and ran my own fingers over the windshield. The exterior was perfectly smooth. But the scratch, that thin, milky white line, was undeniably there, sealed within the layers of glass. I remembered the sound, that high-pitched, deliberate scraping. It had come from outside. I was sure of it. But the proof, the physical evidence, was on the inside. The impossibility of it made my head spin. Must have been a manufacturing defect, the mechanic said with a shrug, already losing interest. Stress fracture from the heat, maybe. Can't be fixed without replacing the whole windshield. But I knew it wasn't a defect. It was a message. A calling card, left by something that could stand outside my car and carve a line on the inside of my windshield. Something that could fry my car's computer with its mere presence. I drove out of that town with a deep, chilling sense of unease. I tried to forget it. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was a series of bizarre, unrelated coincidences. A freak electrical failure. A strange pre-existing flaw in the glass. An animal I hadn't seen. I repeated these logical explanations to myself like a mantra. I drove back to my quiet, orderly life, to my job designing buildings with predictable stress points and reliable materials. But the memory of that night, of that sound, followed me. The scratch was a constant reminder. Every time I got in my car, I saw it. A single vertical white line. A silent, impossible question mark etched into my daily reality. For a month, I succeeded in pretending. I buried the memory under work, under routines, under the comfortable noise of my life. The wilderness and its strange, unsettling secrets began to feel distant again. And then I got the email. It was from my old college geology professor, Dr. Eris Thorne. We hadn't spoken in years, but we had always shared a passion for the strange, beautiful geology of the American Southwest. The email was brief. Mark, I hope this finds you well. I am leading a small private research team on a 2-week expedition into a remote section of the Grand Canyon, an area called the Anasazi Unconformity. We'll be studying some highly unusual crystalline formations. I require a structural engineer to assess the stability of the rock formations before we establish our research post. The pay is excellent and I immediately thought of your expertise. Are you interested? Eris. The Grand Canyon. Another place of deep time, of profound silence. A part of me, the part that now carried a deep primal fear of such places, screamed at me to say no. But another part, the engineer, the problem solver, was intrigued. The Anasazi Unconformity was a geological legend, a place where layers of rock separated by over 1 billion years of time touched directly, a massive gap in the planet's history. And the lure of working with my old mentor, a man I respected immensely, was strong. I told myself it would be a way to face my fear. To go back into the wild, but this time with a team, with equipment, with a purpose. To prove that the night in Zion was just a fluke, a one-time anomaly. I accepted the job. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Our expedition was small. Just 4 of us. There was Dr. Thorne, a brilliant, eccentric man in his late 60s. There was his research assistant, a quiet, intense young woman named Lena. There was a local guide, a grizzled, taciturn man of Havasupai descent named Joseph. And there was me. We hiked for 2 days deep into a section of the canyon that was off-limits to tourists. The landscape was breathtaking and brutal. The silence was even more profound than in Zion. It was a silence that felt ancient, heavy with the weight of unspoken history. We established our base camp on a wide, flat ledge overlooking the Colorado River, 1,000 feet below. Our task for the first few days was to survey the area, to find the most stable location for Thorn's sensitive monitoring equipment. On the third night, Thorn, Lena, and I were sitting by the fire, going over the day's survey data. Joseph, our guide, had been quiet and withdrawn all day, his eyes constantly scanning the canyon walls. "Everything all right, Joseph?" Dr. Thorn asked. Joseph didn't look at him. He was staring out into the immense darkness of the canyon. "The rocks are singing tonight," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A song I haven't heard since I was a boy. My grandfather, he warned me about this song. He said it means the old ones are listening." Thorn and Lena exchanged a skeptical look. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I knew what it felt like to be listened to by something ancient. "Fascinating folklore," Thorn said, with a polite but dismissive smile. Joseph just shook his head slowly and retreated to his tent. Later that night, I was awoken by a sound. It was a faint, high-pitched scraping sound. Scrape! 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 My blood ran cold. It was the same sound. The same deliberate, intelligent, and impossible sound I had heard in Zion. I sat bolt upright in my tent, my heart pounding. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands slick with the sudden, cold sweat. The sound was coming from outside, near the cliff edge where we had set up our main survey station. I slowly unzipped my tent. Thorn and Lena were still asleep in theirs. Joseph's tent was empty. I crept out into the cold, moonlit air. The scraping sound continued, rhythmic and methodical. I moved slowly towards the survey station, using the large boulders for cover. I peered around the edge of a rock. And I saw him. Joseph. He was standing at the edge of the cliff, his back to me. In his hand, he was holding a piece of sharp crystalline quartz. And he was dragging it, slowly and deliberately, across the glass screen of our most expensive piece of equipment, the ground-penetrating radar console. "Scrape! Scrape! Scrape! Joseph!" I whispered, my voice a harsh croak. "What are you doing?" He didn't turn around. He didn't stop. He just kept scraping, carving a long, vertical line into the delicate screen. I ran forward and grabbed his shoulder. "Joseph, stop. You're destroying the equipment." He stopped. He turned to look at me, and my heart seemed to stop with him. His eyes were not his own. They were wide, vacant, and glowing with the faint, pale, internal luminescence. He looked at me, but he didn't see me. He opened his mouth, but the voice that came out was not his. It was a layered, distorted, synthesized voice. A voice that was both digital and ancient. The voice of the broadcast from Bridger Teton. The voice of the thing I had been trying to forget. "The pattern must be completed," it said through Joseph's mouth. "The signal must be answered." He raised the sharp piece of quartz. I thought he was going to attack me. But he just turned back to the console, and with a final hard scrape, he completed the line. Then he dropped the quartz, his body went limp, and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. I stood there frozen, staring at the console screen. There were now 2 lines carved into it. 2 perfectly parallel vertical lines. And as I stared, a new message appeared on the screen, typed out in simple, green text, as if in response. "Query received. Pattern recognized. Who is the sender?" The ground beneath my feet began to hum. A low, powerful vibration that seemed to be rising from the very depths of the canyon. Dr. Thorn and Lena were awake now, shouting my name. But I couldn't look away from the screen, because a new line of text was appearing. Sender identified. Markham Vance. We remember your vehicle. The humming intensified, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. The air grew cold, carrying the same faint, metallic scent of ozone I remembered from my car, from the fissure at the quiet face. The entity, the thing that had marked my windshield, the thing that had spoken through Joseph, was here. And it knew my name. Thorn and Lena ran over, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. What happened? What was that noise? Is Joseph all right? Thorn knelt beside our guide, checking his pulse. He's alive, Thorn said, looking up at me. Just unconscious. What in God's name did he do to the console? I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger at the screen. The message was still there, glowing in the dark. Sender identified. Markham Vance. We remember your vehicle. Lena read it aloud, her voice a shocked whisper. Thorn stood up and stared at the screen, his scientific curiosity warring with the dawning horror. Mark, he said, his voice low and serious. What does this mean? Your vehicle? I found my voice a dry, cracked thing. It found me once before, I said. In Zion. It left a mark on my car. A mark? Thorn asked. 2 marks, I corrected, my gaze fixed on the 2 parallel lines carved into the screen. Just like those. Before Thorn could process this, a new line of text began to type itself out on the screen, letter by agonizing letter. Communication protocol established. You scratched. We scratched. Now you will listen. The humming stopped. The screen went blank. And then every piece of electronic equipment in our camp simultaneously powered on. My phone, Lena's tablet, Thorn's laptop, the digital weather station, even the small LCD screen on my camera. They all flickered to life, their screens glowing with the same eerie, green text. And they all began to display a message. It was not in English. It was a stream of complex, geometric symbols, shapes I had never seen before. Spirals, interlocking hexagons, intricate, fractal patterns. It was a language of pure geometry. It's a data stream, Lena breathed, her scientific mind taking over. It's transmitting something. It's not transmitting, I said, a cold certainty settling over me. It's asking a question. What question? Thorn demanded. And as if in answer, the symbols on all the screens vanished, replaced by a single, simple image. It was a star chart. But it was not our sky. The constellations were all wrong, the geometry of the stars alien and unfamiliar. In the center of the chart was a single, pulsing red dot. And beneath it, a new line of text appeared, this time in plain, simple English. Where is this? I stared at the screen, the full, terrifying implication of the situation crashing down on me. The thing that had found me in Zion was not from this world. It was not a ghost or a spirit of the desert. It was something else. Something lost. A surveyor. A cartographer, just like me, from a place with a different sky. And its vehicle, its ship, had broken down. The scratching on my windshield hadn't been a threat. It had been a question. It had been drawing me a map, a picture of its home, and asking for directions. It had been saying, I am from here. Where am I now? And Joseph, it hadn't possessed him. It had just used him. Like a tool. It had sensed the latent psychic ability in him, the connection to the singing rocks he had spoken of, and had used him to carve the final part of its message. The 2 parallel lines. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a request for a reply. A query sent out into the void. And my presence, my previous encounter, had allowed the query to find its target. Me. It's lost, I whispered, the words feeling insane on my tongue. It's a castaway. And it thinks I can give it a map home. Thorn and Lena stared at me as if I had lost my mind. But as they looked at the alien star chart glowing on all our devices, they couldn't deny the evidence. What do we do? Lena asked, her voice trembling. The voice of Joseph, who was now stirring on the ground, answered her. But it wasn't Joseph's voice. It was the synthesized, layered voice again, speaking from his mouth. You will provide the coordinates, it said calmly. The pattern must be completed. A reply must be sent. The creature wasn't hostile, I realized. Not in the way we understood it. It was just logical. It was an engineer, following its own protocol. It had sent a query. It was waiting for a reply. And it would use any tool at its disposal to get one. We can't, Thorn said, finding his voice. We don't know where here is in its terms. We don't have its frame of reference. Then you will create one, the voice from Joseph said. The geometric patterns reappeared on the screens, this time shifting, changing, as if waiting for input. Awaiting data. Provide reference point. Provide map. It wanted us to draw it a map. To give it the coordinates of Earth, of our sun, of our galaxy, in a language of geometry it could understand. It was an impossible task. But the humming was starting again, louder this time. The pressure in the air was building. This was not a request we could refuse. We spent the rest of that long, terrifying night in a desperate, surreal collaboration with an alien intelligence, speaking through the mouth of our unconscious guide. Thorne, the geologist, described the composition of our planet. Lena, the physicist, described the energy signature of our sun. And I, the structural engineer, I did the only thing I could. I began to draw. On Lena's tablet, using a stylus, I began to sketch the basic, universal truths of our geometry. The shape of a hydrogen atom. The golden ratio. The fractal patterns of a fern. A snowflake, a coastline. I was trying to build a common language from the ground up. And the thing it learned. The patterns on the screen would shift, mimicking my drawings, then altering them, asking questions in a language of pure shape. It was a conversation without words, a meeting of two minds across an unimaginable void. And as I drew, I felt it. The same pulling sensation I had felt in the listener's canyon. It was reading me. It was pulling data not just from the screen, but from my mind. It was learning about our world through the lens of my own memories. The sun was rising when we finally finished. On the screen was a new composite map. It showed its alien star chart, and superimposed upon it, a tiny, glowing blue dot. And beside that dot, a new set of geometric symbols, a new story written in the language we had created together. It was a map leading from its reality to ours. The voice from Joseph spoke one last time. The pattern is complete. The reply has been sent. Thank you for your assistance. Joseph's body went limp. The screens all went blank. The humming stopped. The sun crested the rim of the Grand Canyon, flooding our campsite with the warm, familiar light of a new day. Joseph woke up an hour later. He had no memory of the night's events. He just complained of a splitting headache. We were extracted 2 days later by a team that was not from the university. They were quiet men in unmarked clothing who asked very specific questions and took all of our equipment, especially the damaged console. We were told our research grant had been terminated due to unforeseen environmental hazards. We were made to sign non-disclosure agreements. I live a quiet life now, but it is not the quiet of peace. It is the quiet of waiting. I know that a message has been sent. A map has been delivered. And I know that sometimes when you give a lost stranger directions, they eventually show up at your door. I still have my car. I never replaced the windshield. The 2 scratches are still there on the inside of the glass. A permanent reminder. A signature from the first encounter. And last week, when I came out to my car in the morning, there was a new scratch on the windshield. A 3rd line perfectly parallel to the other 2. The reply was sent. And I think, with the certainty that keeps me awake at night, I have just received a confirmation that it was received. And that someone or something is on its way. Thank you for the completion of this incident report from the Wilderness Protocol. Communication is a fundamental drive for all intelligent life. But we must be careful who we talk to and what maps we choose to share. When a stranger asks for directions, you never truly know where their home is or what they will do once they find yours. If this report has served as a necessary warning, please consider liking this video and subscribing for further contact protocols. The silence of space is not empty. It's just waiting for the right frequency.